peek at some Goodreads accounts, shall we? This is the part of the show where I analyze some Goodreads and recommend some pretty fantastic books. Today we are starting with Sarah Parasol. She is 21, from Canada, has been on Goodreads for 3 years, has rated 275 books with an average rating of 3.28, so like me, she must be ruthless when rating. Ruthless, I tell you. She loved Jane Eyre. I love Jane Eyre. She loved The Bell Jar. I have never read that. She also loved The Book Thief, Pride and Prejudice, and Kafka's The Metamorphoses. Metamorphoses. I never know how to say that. She liked Fangirl, A Midsummer's Night Dream, and The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. Some old school dystopia. She liked The Road by Cormac McCarthy, which is some pretty deep stuff. Now I've heard he wrote the book for his son, who he had when he was pretty old, and he knew he wouldn't live long enough for a lot of his kids' milestones. So he translated that into a parable about a post-apocalyptic world. Anyway, I feel that Sarah and I are kind of on the same wavelength here, so I'm going to recommend a book that I wouldn't recommend to everyone as it's a little odd, but I think she'll enjoy it. This is literary fiction, the winner of the National Book Critics Circle Award and the Ambassador Book Award for Fiction. Properly snooty drumroll. The Accidental Tourist by Anne Tyler. Contrary to what I personally would have expected, I loved this book. It's about a travel writer who hates to travel. He's an introvert who likes his life just so. He's probably a little OCD. Then he meets Muriel, a quirky dog trainer who's definitely outside of his routine. I don't know, I really liked this. He kind of reminded me of my dad a little bit, who also has a very set routine in life, which is very important to him. In recent years, he's been hell-bent on trying to be spontaneous. It's really kind of cute, actually, what my dad thinks is spontaneous. Of course, every year I find myself becoming more like my dad. I have my quirky habits and my little routines. Anyway, so this book has some warm associations for me, but it's also just a really good book. Next up is Books for MKs. Kaylee is 32. She's been on Goodreads for 3 years now. She's a piano teacher, and she owns over 1,000 books. Her favorite genres are classics, kids classics, mystery, fantasy, and poetry. She's rated 1,294 books with an average rating of 3.41. She's rated more books than I have, so this should be interesting to see where we match up. She's one of the few other people I know who's actually read A.A. Milne's mystery novel. You know, he's the guy who wrote Winnie the Pooh. Well, he also wrote The Red House Mystery, which is really good but kind of trippy to read because you can totally tell the same guy wrote both. Another little red book that we both love is this book called The Man Who Was Thursday by G.K. Chesterton. G.K. Chesterton was a good friend of C.S. Lewis's and wrote one of my favorite mystery series, Father Brown. He also wrote this strange, almost psychedelic book called The Man Who Was Thursday. Seriously, for a Catholic philosopher from the 40s, this book reads more like it should have been written by Hunter S. Thompson. At one point, there's an elephant chase, but I'm pretty sure the elephant was a metaphor, but dude, who really knows? Moving on. Kaylee and I have been bonding lately over Juliette Marillier, one of my favorite authors. Seriously, this is historical fantasy, which I didn't really know was a thing before I started reading her books. So good. Kaylee, like myself, was not a big fan of The Time Traveler's Wife. That book was a huge book club book a couple years back. Kaylee is also on the same page as I am about the last book in Anna Godbertson's historical YA Lux series. Still one of the most crushing betrayals of my trust by an author ever. And I agree with Kaylee when she says she wished she'd chucked the whole thing after the first book. Browsing Kaylee's Goodreads page takes me back to all the books I read growing up and as a teen. Good times. Anyway, as she enjoys a good old-fashioned book, I'm going to recommend a book that could arguably be called a young adult novel from the good old year 1912. It was then made into a Fred Astaire film in the 50s, and I just discovered it a couple years back. It is Daddy Longlegs by Jean Webster. Jean Webster is an amazing author from the early 20th century who was a vocal advocate of women's suffrage and education for women. She only wrote a couple books before she died in childbirth, and I just know we're missing some monumentally great classics because she died too young. But she did leave us Daddy Longlegs, which follows an orphan girl through her college years and the letter she writes to the unknown benefactor who has made her education possible. It's really cute. Okay, as always, if you want to be added to my list to be analyzed, drop your Goodreads link in the comments below and I will add you in.